Yeah. So Larry, thank you for joining from Americas,
It's
from
a great
Research Triangle.
pleasure. It's a great pleasure, Rajiv.
Yeah. So Larry, I think first question I ask anybody who's in Tesla, like, what's this love for Tesla and how it started?
Well, I identified with Elon Musk quite early in my life because quite early in his career because I'm from South Africa.
Oh yeah.
And I started hearing about Elon when he was in the process of the first few launches of Falcon 1, and they failed. And I heard about him. My nephew at the time was studying aeronautical engineering, and I heard about Elon, the South African who's in rocket science. I had, as a kid, been playing around with rockets, and I built a rocket at the age of 11. I was pretty excited about hearing this, and so I started reading it up, and I started reading Elon's blogs on the failure of Falcon, I guess it was the launch 3 of Falcon 1, that I first read his first blog and began to realize that this was a different individual. And so I started following him, and that led me to follow his blogs on Tesla. And then I, became intrigued with Tesla. And I've been an investor all my life. I mean, I've been investing in, famously, I invested in Amazon in 1998, I guess it was,
Wow.
1997, 1998. And so, as somebody who struggled who built several software companies in my career, and some non-software companies, some industrial companies, I was fascinated by Elon's approach. So that's what got me started on Elon. I didn't invest right out of the IPO of Tesla, but very shortly after the IPO, I started to accumulate Tesla stock and accumulated consistently. I'm a 10% investor. I balance my risk by investing in very, very risky stocks, such as Amazon in the early years, and very, very, very safe bonds, US Treasuries. I invest 10% in highly, highly, highly speculative stock that I have confidence in, and 90% in long-term bonds. That's how I invest my spare cash.
That was my another question I was about to ask you,
Yep.
but you answered that.
Yeah, so that's my investment philosophy. So I'm constantly seeking out innovation. I'm a very, very strong believer in the philosophy of innovation. And, Kathy Wood of ARC really represents that philosophy of mine, but it was a philosophy that I started very early on in my career, because having been an entrepreneur all my life, started with nothing and built from scratch, and from time to time lost everything, I began to realize the danger of risk, but also the value of cash. And so I separated my investment activity from my need to maintain a very strong balance. And that's what led me to this notion of 10% of my assets at cost into, speculative investments, highly speculative investments. We would call them today, innovation, we also call it today. But it was my own sense of, somebody like myself risking everything, and I would judge them by their skill, their capability, and the fact that they were prepared to risk their own money. So those were the people that I followed. And so Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, those were that was the sort of focus of my investment career. So I followed Elon into SpaceX. Well, I was unable to invest in SpaceX until only a couple of years ago. But when he did go public with Tesla, I was not able at that time because I was in the midst of building the startup. It was quite earlier in that startup career. But shortly after that, maybe a year in, I started accumulating stock. When I really committed to Tesla was in production hell.
When, sorry?
During production hell.
Okay.
So 2017, things were going very badly. Bloomberg, I'm a subscriber to Bloomberg. Bloomberg were really down on Tesla at that point. They always have been, but they were very tough on them at that point. But they started publishing on a daily basis this kind of tracker, VIN tracker, to see how many cars Tesla was really delivering, as a way of perhaps showing that Tesla's just not making it. And I started following that VIN tracker, and I kept on saying to myself, my God, this production is actually increasing at a very rapid rate. Not many people understand exponential curves. I understand exponential curves. And I was watching this VIN track and I was saying, my God, I think they're hitting exponential rates. And then I wouldn't say all in, but I committed a very significant amount of money. And at that point, I had a very small amount of money in Tesla, but by the end of that process, I was very heavily invested in Tesla. And I leveraged it through calls, and I did extraordinarily well on it. And that was the basis of my investment in Tesla. And since then, I've been, constantly maintaining a fairly good exposure to Tesla. That's my story.
But that's an amazing story, because when I talk to some people, they talk about they drove the car and after that, they put all their money in. But I think you were looking more at from a businessman or an engineering perspective, that I think so. It's a very different perspective, but a very commercial one in certain sense, but a one very well understood one. I think when I was talking to Randy, I think he's also a businessman. I think he looked at a company slightly differently. So
Randy's had an incredible career. I mean, if anybody, has experienced the ups and downs of, the small guy getting into business. I mean, that was my story too. I was I started with zero and built over time. So, and that was really Randy's story.
Yeah, no. So you said that earlier you figured out that the person is special, Elon is special. What was that? What characteristics or what traits made you feel that?
It was reading the blogs that he wrote on both Tesla and on SpaceX. I understood the intellectual power that he brought to the subject, this first principle thinking, and I had not expressed it. I had not formalized the thinking that he was able to express. I had instinctually operated by those principles, instinctively, I think is the word, instinctively operated by those principles, but had never expressed them, in such with such clarity.
Yeah.
And then watching him execute against them, that's what brought me to realize the power of his philosophy and his instincts. and the fact that he was able to execute against them. You know, I hadn't read his biography at that point. I hadn't read the background on him, but reading his blogs made me realize the intellectual thought that went into it, and then the fact that he was able to operate under those, actually operationalize that thinking. That was what blew me away. And it continues to amaze me, the ability to operationalize that philosophy. And, you know, I read Walter Isaacson's book.
I'm reading it.
You're reading it now. You know, I had the pleasure and privilege of speaking to Walter Isaacson on Spaces and asking him and listening to him, and then read the book. And it's an amazing book, really, because it kind of closes the loop for me on reading Elon's writings, watching him operationalize what he was expressing, and then reading Isaacson's sort of biography, giving structure to how he comes about it. Now, he's not perfect. I mean, he's very flawed, actually, like all of us humans.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of, you know, people. People are all flawed, and none of us are perfect. And that's fine. But understanding his commitment to that thinking and how he operationalizes it and the methodology by which he implements it is fantastic. You know, I wrote a book on methodology, and so I'm very attuned to this notion of conceptual thought, methodology, and then implementation. And that's what I did in my business. So that's why he appeals to me so much. And of course, he's a countryman. I understand his background. I kind of went through some of the things that he's gone through on a different scale and maybe on a different basis, but nonetheless, we have a similar background. So that's the story.
No, I think it's interesting, but like 2017 is what you started, and now I think it's 2024. A lot has happened, right? The speed with Tesla, with SpaceX, and then now with Twitter, X, and Neuralink and Boring Company. I mean, a lot has come, right? I mean, I was reading how he came up with the idea of Boring Company sitting in Hong Kong, thinking that the city is three-dimensional while the roads are not. So, what has you think that it is it too much on his plate, or do you fear for Tesla's future?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to judge. I shouldn't judge because there was a time in my life when I was running 4 companies. One gets sucked in, you know, he got sucked in. I was younger than he was when I got sucked in. It was a mistake that I made. And I recognize that. I don't know if he recognizes it yet as a mistake or not. But I will say that he's handling it a hell of a lot better than I ever could. But, you know, does it affect Tesla? I have to say this about Tesla. One of the most instructive days of my life was Tesla's Investors Day last year. I was not ready to see the depth of management, the depth of intellect and skill and knowledge of the 20 or so people that came out to talk about their role at Tesla. And I was blown away. And that gave me a lot of courage about what's coming down the pike. I had no idea how deep the management bench was at Tesla until I attended that meeting. And, I'm an investor as well in SpaceX. And I have been equally pleased to see the depth and skill sets of the people at SpaceX. So I have developed a much greater understanding in the last 2 years of Elon's skill at building teams and keeping teams focused on a single or a set of strategic targets. So, ever since 2010 or so, when I became aware of him, 2009 maybe, that I became aware of Elon and started following him, just reading his blogs until today, he has managed to impress me. That's not to say that I believe in everything he says, and that's not to say that I'm aligned with everything he does. I'm not. I have some very healthy disagreements with him about his methods and his style and some of his philosophies. But on the other hand, I take him, as a man in full. I take him as a whole person, and I'm a pretty strong acolyte of his.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think the book is making this clear to me as well. There are certain parts I really hate about his personality, especially his outbursts on the employees and firing them on the spot,
Yeah, and I've seen that, listen, I'm responsible for that kind of behavior myself. I've lost my temper from time to time with my employees, as much as I hate to admit it. I've done that. And it's entirely against my philosophy and entirely against my will. It's happened. Perhaps it happens to him more than it happened to me. Well, let me rephrase that. It happened to me more in my youth than it happens to me in my current age. So it's a function of age, it's a function of maturity, but it's also a function of impatience.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
I get that. The intensity.
When you're focused on an end and you're not getting to that end, the frustration really boils over, and sometimes it's uncontrollable. So that's not his
I think it's
shining light.
philosophical also, Larry, in certain sense, because I've been reading some of the ancient philosophy and which talks about it's all about journey, not about destination. But when I look at Elon's, it looks to be all about destination, and so I think I have a lot of questions on that front for me, but it's not the right
Yeah.
platform to talk. Maybe we can chat offline on this. Let me come to Tesla. What's the big business Tesla? What are you most bullish on Tesla? I think EV obviously is an area where they're doing, but what is the I think but it's a multiple startups in one company. So what is
Yeah.
most where's the most
Tesla represents Elon's Weltanschauung. It represents his worldview. And so his worldview is very clear. He understands that one of the greatest challenges of civilization is, as we move from, 1 billion people to 9 billion people to, I don't know, 15, 20 billion people, as we're making this transition as a global society, the need to move from, the Industrial Revolution to the intellectual revolution, or the revolution of the intellect, is becoming profound. The need to solve the limits of having to transform molecules to being able to, transform electrons and to be able to solve the problem, not even the problem, to solve the factors necessary to sustain that kind of civilization. He sees Tesla as this means of supporting this transformation. Sounds, it sounds very aspirational and sounds a little crazy, but he's doing it across, a very broad swath.
That's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah. And if anybody has the means to do it, I mean, it's kind of like Carnegie in the steel revolution of the turn of the century, of the 19th century. It's not that, of the 19th century to 20th century, not that different. It's a global transformation at a profound level, and he sees the answers to it, and he's kind of positioning the company to do that. And everybody thinks it's crazy, everybody thinks it's reaching, and everybody thinks it's a sham and everything, whatever they think. But he's pretty damn serious about it. And, if you look at what he's doing with energy, I've been studying the numbers for the energy business, and people don't understand how astounding that business is. The business is not showing much profit. It's showing a bit of growth and not much profit. But actually, what's happening in that business is quite amazing. The margins are dramatically higher than are being realized because so much is being held back in terms of earnout in the business. So if you look at the business today, it looks like it's making 10, 15% margin. But there's about 25%, 15 to 20% margin that is being held back for actual performance in the future. Well, if you actually now predict that out, given the productivity, given the production capacity of that factory and of the second factory that they're building, those numbers become astonishing. I tried to show this a little bit earlier, but it's kind of like everything else he does. It's like you can't really believe it at the beginning until the numbers start happening. But I've looked at the numbers, and that energy business is going to be incredible. The car business is going through a hiatus at the moment as it's waiting for the production of the next generation vehicle, or next generation platform, I should call it. And when we get to 2025, mid 2025, 2026, we'll see the outcome of that. I do believe that has been delayed, and the pandemic caused that delay, but it's coming, and it's going to transform that business. And then you have the robotics business. I'm busy investing in multiple different robotics companies, or thinking about it, quite apart from Tesla, because humanoid robotics, robots are going to be an incredible part of our future. Nobody's giving Tesla any credit for that. And yet every robotics company I speak to, and there are quite a few I'm speaking to, acknowledge that Tesla is going to be a major player in that business. And that is going to probably be the largest business on earth within 5 to 10 years. So, you take just those three strands of Tesla's operations, and you understand that it's a business that is promising profound change. Now, it could fail. He takes very big bets. It could fail. But my goodness, if he succeeds at all three of those, or any two of those three, it's going to be a very astonishing business. I mean, it's going to have value that's almost unheard of. And I haven't yet spoken about FSD.
Yeah, I think that I have some doubts and questions on that. What are you? How are
Yeah.
you looking at it?
Sorry, did I what?
I have some doubts and questions on FSD. I mean, not
Yeah.
not doubts. Like for example, the take-up rate. Like I was listening to the last call, Elon himself said that he's surprised that other auto companies are not lining up to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm not sure what. And I think it's just matter of time, in my view. It's just
Yeah.
matter of time. But good to hear your perspective. What's your view? And I thought the recent version is doing pretty well.
Well, the recent version is a new architecture. New architectures take a while. Nothing happens overnight. It's going to be disappointing before it becomes extraordinary. When you start an entirely new architecture, in my experience, there's always this kind of
Mm.
curve. You go down before you're up. I'm sure you're familiar with that. The early signs are pretty good, but I think there'll be, all kinds of problems. I have very little doubt that it's going to succeed. A year ago, I said 2 to 3 years. Now we're looking at 1 to 2 years. We're a year down the road. I think I called it right. Could be wrong by a year, one way or the other. What does it matter? I mean, we're talking about massive added value. We're talking about added value that is, almost difficult to contemplate. So just like all these other things that Elon does, he promises the earth, he delivers the moon, and then ultimately the earth. So I'm one of these believers, and I could be wrong. Could be wrong. I'd be the first to admit if I'm wrong, but I'm very confident that it's going to go well. So you're talking about, FSD transforming the world. You're talking about robots transforming the world. You're talking about energy transforming the world, all in one company. I mean, who could ask for anything more?
That's true. That's true. I think, look, but Larry, not a lot of people understand it. I post something pro Elon on LinkedIn, and I get so much of shit sometimes from people saying that.
But that's a secret power. So Rajiv, if everybody knew what we knew, if everybody believed what we knew, what would our beta be? What would our
Alpha.
alpha be?
Yeah,
It would be zero.
yeah.
If we are confident in our beliefs, if we have very high level, of conviction, then the alpha is extraordinary. And people complain about the share price. You mentioned Gary Black earlier in our
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
conversation. He's complaining about the share price and he's worried about this and that and that. I mean,
I find it myopic, though. I mean, I find it a bit myopic.
no, it's not myopic because he has a fund and he's looking for people to invest in his fund. And people to invest in his fund, they look at the performance and the performance hasn't been good. I get that. And I questioned why he holds Tesla shares, because the next year or two, they're not going to be anywhere. Advertise, not advertise, do this, do that. I mean, Elon cares less about tomorrow's revenue, cares less about tomorrow's performance. He cares very much about cash in the bank because
Okay.
he's got this massive
Yeah, yeah,
plan
yeah.
in
The
mind.
book also shows that, right? Yeah.
Massive plan in mind. He's not going to give up any of that cash. And there's Gary saying, buy your shares back, blah, blah, blah. No. Elon's got $30 billion in the bank. He wants $50 billion in the bank. And if you look at his plans, if you think about building, 10 million bots, if you look about, building massive fleets of robotaxis, if you think about building massive energy plants, you're going to need every bit of cash you've got. So I'm comfortable with where he is.
So
But
if I
Gary's not.
Yeah, no. If I say, sorry to interrupt you, Larry, if I say that investing in Tesla is more about understanding the company's DNA and
Yeah,
understanding Elon's vision and personality rather than numbers, am I correct?
you're absolutely on target, Rajiv.
Mm.
I'm convinced of it. I mean, I get carried away, and I've been a little carried away tonight, but I'm absolutely aligned with you. You either have confidence in his confidence and his methods and his approach to business, or you probably should move on.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. And a lot of people said the last earning call was bullshit. And when I heard it, I didn't find it so bad. I found it, as a matter of fact, what do you think? Is going to shout about it or going to be dance about things? He's on a mission or a vision, you know?
No, I somewhat disagree with you there.
Okay.
I think the last call was pretty abysmal, and the call before it was also pretty abysmal. I thought the best call they ever did was when he never turned up to the call. You know, in those days, they really, I mean, the one call he didn't turn up to turned out pretty good from the point of view of the analysts. Elon could care less about that. In
Yeah,
fact, he holds them in very low regard, which is a pity because some of them have really some very good points. But he holds them in very low regard, and so he has a very low level of patience for those calls. He doesn't conduct them in the manner in which they're expected to be conducted. So they don't go well. But I always regard them as a great opportunity because I know the stock's going to go
yeah,
down right
yeah.
after.
So, but have you done some numbers on this? And I know that you're not very Excel sheet uh, kind of a person, but I'm sure when you're investing, you're putting your money, hard-earned money, you would have something in mind, right? Some numbers that, this business might grow up to this, market cap might grow up to this. And, obviously with a healthy skepticism out there.
Rajiv, I used to do a little bit of that because a lot of other people did that, and I thought it was pretty good. And I tried my hand at it, and I soon discovered that there are so many variables that to try and get the next quarter's margins and earnings, which I do every quarter because people kind of expect it. You know, the variables are so great. The few times that I've been accurate for all the wrong reasons. I've got been out by on so many parameters, they've canceled themselves out and come out with the right number. So in my view, it's kind of it's a random walk. But what I do though is look at the future.
Yeah.
I look very strongly at a 5 and 10-year view of the company. And, because I'm investing not for my own future, but I'm investing for my grandchildren's future. And so I look out 5, 10, 15, and 25 years. And then I take very broad views. What is the future going to look like for robotaxis? What are the future going to look like for bots? What is for humanoid robots? What is the future going to look like for energy? These are more important than what's the next quarter going to be, or what's next year going to be, or what's the next 3 years going to be. These are, the kind of questions that answer how do I want to position my portfolio for the future of my family? And that is really more important to me right now. So I may be in a different position to a lot of your followers, who may be thinking about, their next 5 years or their next 10 years or their next 3 years or the next 1 year. If you're looking for the next 1 year, I'm not sure Tesla's the right
Yeah,
thing,
it's
right
not.
investment
It's
for
a
you.
2025, 2030 story, if you ask me.
Yes, yes. And then it's a different matter. And so if you're investing to look for that pop, look at, I don't know, some Reddit, you know, I I don't like that kind of, speculation. It's not for me. And in any case, I don't speculate with a large portion of my wealth.
But what's the look? Clearly, you support the mission. You've been following the gentleman for so long. What's the bearish argument you have in your mind for Tesla?
Well, it's Elon's stability. Elon's you know, this company, this group of companies, because I'm invested in almost every one of his companies, this group of companies really depends upon his drive, his ability to take all these people who work for him, who are focused on the relatively short term, and to keep them focused on the long term, to keep them focused on the greater on the greater target, to keep them committed to the notion of this first principles. We rely upon him almost solely to be able to do that.
That's the problem.
Now, I told you how impressed I was with his management group at the last Investor Day, and that gave me a lot of hope. And what impresses me is to see what some of the graduates from Tesla are able to do in the world, when they leave Tesla and what they're able to do. And that shows me that, that people do learn from him. And so maybe if he were not here, those companies would continue. I remain convinced that he is the guiding light and he is the person that we rely upon. And so we have this extreme, risk of, the man.
Yeah.
And he is a target of so much wrath and anger and negativity that this is the most extreme risk we do face. And it's a very serious risk, and it's a very real risk.
Yeah, look, I think Tesla, there's a lot of foundation already been laid. So if he's not there, the company will still do well. It might get a very Wall Street type of CEO with but the grandeur or what the company could accomplish or the potential which can be unleashed will go for a toss.
If we were to lose Elon in Tesla tomorrow, that company would be split.
Yeah.
Somebody would take the energy piece, somebody would take the robot piece, or it would be closed down and the car piece would become another auto company. It would be a very tragic process.
Will you sell your shares if that happens, if he leaves?
Yeah, almost certainly.
Okay.
I mean, the shares would probably reduce in value by half to 2/3. If you value this as a conventional car company, it may be worth 90 cents, $90 a share, maybe $70 a share as a conventional car company. And, that's probably what would happen. And I may be wrong. I may be out by 50 to 100%, but what does it matter? Absent Elon. And look, the risk isn't that, something terrible would happen to him, although that's a risk. The risk is that, Wall Street Journal publish a negative article about him on the front page almost every other day now. He's in the bullseye sites of so many politicians, so many newspapers, and it's his own fault. I mean, he feels driven by, his need
He's a
to maintain.
drama guy. You can see in the
Yeah.
book as well.
Yeah.
Personally, sometimes Larry, it's very personal. I fear for his life also.
I do.
Yeah.
I fear for his life as, look, when I have a list of risks, that's my top risk.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now let me just talk about, you've been a businessman, handled businesses, invest in businesses. How do you look about the price reductions and, continuous bringing the pricing down as you
Oh, I
start?
have a very simple philosophy. Gary's right that a little bit of that, serious advertising could widen the TAM somewhat for each of these cars.
Hmm.
But here's the reality. To generate the volume of vehicles necessary for these two makes of cars, the 3 and the Y, look, the S and the X don't matter. The numbers will never have any impact. So it's 3 and a Y. Tesla have got 2 models of vehicle. To fill those factories with those 2 models, all the advertising in the world is not going to solve that problem. Those vehicles have to sell at a price point where they can actually deliver 3 million cars, 2.5 million cars, or 2.2 million cars a year until the next gen is available. Now, the next gen is late. It's not late by a year, it's late by a year and a half. Why is it late? You can blame the company's management. I remember, and I say this quite often, I remember very distinctly a interview between Elon and a journalist, and Elon got this extremely wistful look in his eye. He was talking about what's coming down the pike. He said, it's so difficult for us to do one car at a time, and other auto companies are able to do 5 or 6 cars at a time. And so that's been the Achilles heel, that he hasn't been able to develop multiple models at the same time because he is so
Perfectionist.
protective of his cash and his liquidity. And so I somewhat blame him. I somewhat blame the pandemic. I think had there not been a pandemic, they would have moved straight from the Y into the next design. And, he was so focused on robotaxi, because he anticipated solving the self-driving problem a little bit early.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I blame him. Blame in a very broad sense. It was his responsibility. But, he made some calls, and then he was also faced with this problem of the pandemic, which they managed brilliantly, by the way. But nonetheless, it set them back a year and a half. And here they are with 2 models of cars and the productive capability of 3 million cars a year. Well, you're not going to sell 3 million cars a year at $50,000 a car. You're just not. The market doesn't exist. The number of people able to pay $1,000 a month for a car doesn't, it's just not there. So you have to drop the prices. So Gary's 100% correct. You really need to market those cars a lot more actively. I don't disagree with him. But he's 100% wrong that will solve the pricing problem. You still have to reduce the price of the cars. Both truths are operable together. Yeah. One does not cancel the other. So in a way, I agree with Gary, but I also disagree with Gary. In a way, I agree with Elon, but I also disagree with Elon.
No, I get it. It's totally business decision, I guess. And again, I'm nobody to make these calls or judgments, but I think it was a bit of a strategic mistake not to bring the smaller car earlier.
I'm not sure they could have done it much earlier. I know that there was a delay while they argued the robotaxi versus the steering wheel. It's possible that cost them a year. And if it did, that's on him. That's, does reflect his single-mindedness, does reflect his stubbornness. Yeah.
And you kind of think, I know that you think advertising is not a panacea or it's not going to solve the problem, but it's needed.
What is needed? I missed the question.
Advertising.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I remember the ad that Apple had that
Super
Steve
Bowl.
Jobs drove at the Super Bowl, the 1984 ad with the guy throwing the hammer at the screen and breaking the screen. It was very powerful, extraordinarily powerful. But I will tell you something. It didn't sell the iPhone. The iPhone was not a great success on its launch day. For the first year, the iPhone was kind of a meh product. You know what sold the iPhone? You know what actually got the iPhone to take off? Do you know?
No, I don't know. I just like that it was like a toy.
It was a toy. Nobody was buying it. And then what happened? There's an app for that. Do you remember the ad? There's an app for that. The App Store changed everything. The App Store came a year or so after the
Servicing, when it became the servicing kind of a stuff.
And then everything changed.
Oh.
Everybody bought the iPhone for the apps, and the apps made the iPhone.
That's good one.
What I'm trying to say is that advertising is not the be all and end all. It's not going to solve the problem of pricing, and it's not going to solve the problem of volume. It may alleviate some of the problems. iPhone was very heavily advertised in the first year. And it was kind of it did okay, not great. It was the early adopters ran in, bought the iPhone, and then kind of just stuck at the level until the App Store opened. And then it took off. So what I'm trying to say is that all the advertising in the world is not going to solve the problem. It's going to alleviate the problem, but it's not going to solve the problem.
I think a couple more questions before we call it. And look, I'm loving the discussion. I'm learning so much from your thinking and your broad view. Somewhere I think I gel with that thinking. Somewhere I'm feeling that, I kind of very much resonate with this thinking. You buy into this robotaxi thing? Is it going to be reality? Could it be reality?
Yeah, I think the robotaxi is going to change transport. I like Pierre Ferragu's approach to the robotaxi. I don't necessarily agree with everything Pierre says, but one of the things that I really like about his suggestion is that Tesla not operate the robotaxi service, that Tesla provide the robotaxi and the software support of the robotaxi to operators like Uber and Hertz and so on and so forth. Because I think that's a different business. And I think it's not going to be winner takes all everywhere. It's going to be winner takes most on a localized basis, on a by city, by state, by county, by country. And so Tesla can be a supplier to all of those winners and can enable all of those winners with its technology, with its charging capacity, and with its vehicles. And I think that would be the lowest cost entry into the broadest possible distribution of the robotaxi. So I think what it'll do, it'll dramatically increase revenue in terms of number of cars sold, dramatically increase revenue in terms of services offered, but all of it distributed through third parties. And so you'd have Hertz and Uber competing with each other in Dallas, Texas, or Austin or New York City, each with their own offering, all based upon Tesla's technology.
And you think that Tesla will be the biggest company in the world? Do you buy into that? Aramco plus Apple?
I don't care. You know, if you look at Tesla's energy business, if you look at Tesla's robotaxi business, if you look at Tesla's robotics business, it's a gigantic business. Will it be the biggest company in the whole? Who cares? What does it matter? If I'm earning, you know, if I'm earning my capital back 5 times a year, do I care whether it's the biggest business or the second business? Well, I don't care.
No, but that trajectory ensures you certain kind of returns, Larry, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, it does. And that's what I worry about. You know,
what do you mean you
biggest
worry?
company in the world, who knows?
Okay. No, you've done so much of work on disruption. My question to you is, what's the way to, first thing is two questions here. How to identify a great disruptor?
When you find out, let me know. It's so difficult. It is truly, truly difficult. You know, clearly NVIDIA, we're talking on the night that NVIDIA announced, you know,
Great
record
earnings.
earnings.
Yeah.
Stock went up. It was amazing, amazing evening. You know, I held NVIDIA until 2022. For many years. I sold in 2022. Here we are, 2025 and 2024, and the world has changed. How do you tell a disruptor? That's a very, very good question, and I don't know the answer. Right now, we're living through the world of, you know, this incredible change towards artificial intelligence. I think we're in another false start. I think there's several false starts to go. Jan LeCun, you know, I repeat this often, so anybody who's listened to me hearing the story for the 50th time, I repeat Jan LeCun's answer when he was asked, you know, are we on the verge, and this is going back 5 years maybe, are we on the verge of, you know, general intelligence or general artificial intelligence? And he said, you know, it's like climbing a mountain. You struggle and struggle and struggle, and you get to the top, and suddenly you realize that behind the mountain, there's another taller mountain. And so you have to climb that mountain, and you have no idea of how many taller mountains are behind that taller mountain. So I think we're reaching the top of a very tall mountain, but I don't think we know what's beyond that. So how do we tell what's disruption? You know,
It's not an easy question.
no.
No, it's not. But I think what maybe the last question will be that when you invest in disruptive company, what do you look for? I think that's an easier one.
In a software company?
In any disruptors.
Disruptive company. You know, I look for proof that it is truly disruptive. And to look for that proof, I've got to see what the rest of the industry is doing. I've got to understand why this particular set of solutions are going to be better than another set of solutions. You know, I've experienced so many SaaS products that are a point solution to a small problem that people think are disruptive. And I look at it and think to myself, that I can build that. And why is that special? Just every single one of these SaaS products, I see that and I think to myself, that's just code. There's nothing disruptive about that. And so disruptive is, firstly, it has to be a true invention, something that has not been considered possible before.
Okay.
And then it has to be transformative. It doesn't just, you know, enable you to do something a little bit easier than before, or set a particular flag that has not been set before, hasn't been thought of before. It has to change the way life is lived. So, for me, disruptive was, the introduction of electricity, the introduction of the telephone, the introduction of the telegraph, the introduction of the internal combustion engine. And these were disruptions. The introduction of the battery, these were disruptive. So disruption doesn't happen easily and it doesn't happen often. And if you're seeing something that's happening and it's like something similar that happened before, that's not disruption.
I get it.
And it's very, very unique and it doesn't happen often.
Thanks, Gary. I think that's such an amazing chat. I feel inspired by what you said. As I said, that we didn't talk a lot of facts, but we talked a lot of philosophy which drives those facts, and I think that's very, very critical. So
Thanks, Rajiv. I enjoyed it very much.
thank you so much, Larry, and hope to chat with you again. Take care. Bye.